The rain lashed against the dusty streets of Promise Creek like 1,000 tiny whips, turning the main thoroughfare into a river of mud. Naomi Winters clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, the soaked fabric offering little protection against the April downpour of 1876. Her boots sank ankle-deep with each desperate step as she pushed forward, the letter from her deceased father's lawyer growing damp in her pocket, her only proof of inheritance to a property she'd never seen, in a town where she knew not a soul. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the frontier town's weathered buildings. Most sensible folk had taken shelter from the deluge, but Naomi had nowhere to go. The stagecoach had dropped her at the edge of town before racing off to escape the storm, leaving her alone with her single carpetbag of possessions. Her chestnut hair, once carefully pinned, now hung in soaked tendrils around her face. "Miss," a deep voice called out over the storm's rumble. "Miss, you'll catch your death out here." Naomi turned, blinking rain from her eyes. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the curtain of water, the silhouette of a wide-brimmed hat unmistakable against the stormy sky. The rider guided his horse closer, and as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, she saw his face weathered and tanned beneath the shadow of his hat, but with eyes that held genuine concern. "Let me be the shelter you've needed," the man said, extending a gloved hand toward her. No one should stand alone in a storm like this. Naomi hesitated. Back in Boston, accepting help from a strange man would be unthinkable, but this wasn't Boston, and she was desperate. "I'm looking for the land office," she said, her voice nearly drowned by the pounding rain. "Or perhaps a hotel for the night," the cowboy nodded. "Land office is closed at this hour, especially in weather like this. The Promise Creek Inn is just down the way. Name's Hayes Callahan, madam. I can escort you there." "Naomi Winters," she replied, reaching for his outstretched hand with trembling fingers. With surprising strength, he pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "Hold tight, Miss Winters," Hayes instructed as she tentatively placed her hands at his waist. The horse moved forward at a steady pace through the churning mud of the main street. "You're new to Promise Creek," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," she admitted, raising her voice above the storm. "I've come to claim my father's property. He passed last winter." "My condolences," Hayes replied, guiding the horse around a deep puddle. "Who was your father?" "Abraham Winters." The cowboy's back stiffened noticeably beneath her hands. "Old Abe was your father? You knew him?" Naomi asked, surprised. "Everyone knew Abe," Hayes said, his tone unreadable. "Here's the inn." He reined his horse to a stop before a 2-story clapboard building with warm light spilling from its windows. Dismounting with fluid grace, Hayes helped Naomi down, her sodden skirts heavy around her ankles. "Mrs. Parsons runs a respectable establishment," he said, retrieving Naomi's carpet bag. "Tell her Hayes sent you. She'll take good care of you." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," Naomi said, suddenly aware of how closely they stood beneath the inn's small awning. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat as he looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. "Just Hayes, please." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "And you should know, Miss Winters, that your father's property might not be exactly what you're expecting." Before she could question him further, he tipped his hat and turned away, mounting his horse with practiced ease. "Welcome to Promise Creek, Miss Winters. I reckon we'll be seeing each other again soon." As Hayes rode back into the downpour, Naomi watched until the rain swallowed his silhouette. With a deep breath, she turned and pushed open the door to the inn, wondering what exactly she had inherited, and why the mention of her father's name had caused such a reaction in the handsome cowboy who had come to her rescue. The Promise Creek Inn was warm and dry, with a modest lobby furnished with well-worn but clean furniture. A plump woman with graying hair looked up from behind a small desk, her eyes widening at Naomi's bedraggled appearance. "Good heavens, child, you're soaked to the bone." The woman hurried around the desk, her crisp apron a stark contrast to Naomi's dripping clothes. "Mrs. Parsons?" Naomi asked, water pooling beneath her feet on the wooden floor. "Hayes Callahan directed me here." "Hayes did he?" Mrs. Parsons' expression softened. "Well, any friend of Hayes is welcome here. Let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death." Within the hour, Naomi found herself in a small but comfortable room, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, her wet clothes hanging near the fireplace to dry. Mrs. Parsons had brought her a tray with hot tea and a bowl of stew that warmed her from the inside out. "So, what brings you to our little corner of Wyoming territory?" Mrs. Parsons asked, stoking the fire. "My father was Abraham Winters," Naomi explained, blowing gently on her tea. "I've come to claim his property." Mrs. Parsons' hand stilled on the poker. "Abraham Winters was your father. I had no idea Abe had family back east. He rarely spoke of Promise Creek," Naomi admitted. "We weren't close. After my mother died when I was 10, he sent me to live with my aunt in Boston. I hadn't seen him in 15 years until I received word of his death." "I see." Mrs. Parsons set the poker aside. "Well, Abe was an interesting character, kept to himself mostly, especially these last few years." "Mr. Callahan Hayes seemed surprised when I mentioned who my father was," Naomi said carefully. "Is there something I should know?" Mrs. Parsons smoothed her apron. "It's not my place to say, dear. Best you speak with Mr. Hargrove at the land office tomorrow, or perhaps Hayes himself. He knew your father better than most." After Mrs. Parsons left, Naomi sat by the fire, watching raindrops race down the windowpane. Her father had been a mystery to her for most of her life, a shadow figure who sent occasional letters and money for her education, but remained emotionally distant. Now she wondered what kind of life he had built here in Promise Creek, and why he had left his property to the daughter he had all but abandoned. As she drifted toward sleep, Naomi found her thoughts returning to Hayes Callahan, to the strength of his hand as he pulled her onto his horse, to the flash of recognition in his eyes at her father's name. She wondered what he knew about Abraham Winters, and why the mere mention of her father had seemed to change something between them, even in that brief encounter. Morning arrived with clear skies and brilliant sunshine that belied the previous night's tempest. Naomi dressed in her now dry traveling suit, thankful that the mud had mostly brushed away. After a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and coffee provided by Mrs. Parsons, she set out to find the land office. Promise Creek looked different in the daylight, a typical frontier town with a main street lined by false-fronted businesses, wooden sidewalks still damp from the rain, and mountains rising majestically in the distance. People nodded politely as she passed, curiosity evident in their gazes. Clearly, newcomers were rare enough to warrant attention. The land office was a small building wedged between the general store and a barber shop. A bell tinkled as Naomi pushed open the door, announcing her arrival to a thin man with spectacles who sat behind a desk cluttered with maps and documents. "Good morning," she said. "I'm looking for Mr. Hargrove." "That would be me, miss." He peered at her over his spectacles. "How may I be of service? My name is Naomi Winters. I've come about my father's property, Abraham Winters." Mr. Hargrove's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Winters?" "Yes, of course, we've been expecting you, though not quite so soon. Please have a seat." Naomi settled into the chair opposite his desk, removing the letter from her reticule. "This is the notification I received from Mr. Patterson, my father's lawyer." Yes. Hargrove skimmed the letter, nodding. "Everything appears to be in order. Your father was quite specific about his wishes. The property is to pass to you upon his death, with all improvements and contents therein." "Could you tell me about the property?" Naomi asked. "The letter mentioned a ranch, but I'm afraid I know very little about it." Hargrove adjusted his spectacles. "Well, it's not exactly a ranch in the traditional sense. Your father owned a modest parcel about 5 miles outside of town, 50 acres with a cabin and a small barn. He ran a few horses, nothing substantial, but the land itself." He hesitated. "Yes," Naomi prompted. "The land sits on Bitter Creek, which has been the subject of some dispute in recent years. Water rights are precious out here, Miss Winters." "I see," Naomi said, though she didn't entirely. "Is there someone who could take me to see the property today?" "I could arrange for," Hargrove began, but was interrupted by the door opening behind them. "Morning, Howard," a familiar voice said. "Mrs. Parsons mentioned Miss Winters might be here." Naomi turned to find Hayes Callahan filling the doorway, hat in hand. Sunlight streamed in behind him, illuminating the auburn highlights in his dark hair. He was even more handsome in daylight, tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw softened by the hint of a smile. His clothes were simple but well kept, a blue cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and a leather vest that had seen its share of weather. "Mr. Callahan," she acknowledged, hoping the warmth in her cheeks wasn't visible. "I thought you might need a guide to your father's place," Hayes said. "I was heading that way regardless." Mr. Hargrove looked between them. "Hayes is well acquainted with the area, Miss Winters. You'd be in good hands." Naomi hesitated only briefly. "That would be most kind, Mr. Callahan. Just Hayes, remember." His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I've got my wagon outside. We can leave whenever you're ready." After completing the necessary paperwork with Mr. Hargrove, Naomi found herself seated beside Hayes on the bench of a sturdy wagon drawn by 2 chestnut horses. Her carpet bag rested behind them, along with several burlap sacks that Hayes explained contained supplies from the general store. "Do you always offer escort services to strangers, Mr. Callahan?" Naomi asked as they left the town behind, the wagon bouncing slightly on the rutted road. Hayes chuckled. "Only when I find them standing in the rain." He glanced at her, "and it's still just Hayes." "Then you must call me Naomi," she replied. "After all, you've already seen me at my most bedraggled." "Naomi," he repeated, as if testing the name, "it suits you." They fell into a companionable silence as the wagon rolled through the Wyoming landscape. Spring had painted the rolling hills in vibrant greens, with wildflowers dotting the meadows in splashes of yellow and purple. In the distance, snow still capped the highest peaks of the mountains. "It's beautiful," Naomi breathed, drinking in the vastness of it all. After years in Boston's crowded streets, the open space was both intimidating and exhilarating. "That it is," Hayes agreed. "Different from back east, I imagine. Entirely." She glanced at his profile. "Have you always lived here?" "Born in Missouri, but I've been in these parts since '62, came west after mustering out of the Union Army." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Your father arrived around the same time." Naomi seized the opening. "You mentioned knowing my father. Were you friends?" Hayes was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "We were neighbors. His property borders mine to the north. We helped each other out from time to time, as folks do out here." "But," Naomi prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but your father was a private man, kept to himself mostly." Hayes guided the horses around a bend in the road. "Folks in town have their opinions about him, but Abe and I understood each other." "What opinions?" Naomi pressed. Hayes sighed. "Some thought him peculiar. He'd go weeks without coming to town, then appear with stories about the stars and ancient civilizations. He collected books, had shelves full of them in his cabin. Not common for a man living alone in these parts." "That sounds like the father I remember," Naomi said softly. "He was always reading, even back in Boston. My mother used to tease that he loved his books more than us." "He spoke of you, you know," Hayes said, surprising her. "Not often, but sometimes when the whiskey loosened his tongue. He was proud of your schooling." Naomi's throat tightened. "He never told me that. Some men find it harder to speak their feelings than to cross 1,000 miles of wilderness," Hayes said. "Doesn't mean the feelings aren't there." They crested a small hill and Hayes pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead, "Winters' place." Below them, nestled in a gentle valley, stood a small cabin with a porch wrapping around 2 sides. A brook, Bitter Creek, Naomi presumed wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. A weathered barn stood nearby with a corral containing 3 horses who lifted their heads at the sight of the wagon. "It's smaller than I expected," Naomi admitted. "Out here, it's not the size of your holding that matters," Hayes said. "It's the water rights. That creek runs year-round, even in the driest summers. Makes this land more valuable than parcels 5 times its size." As they approached the cabin, Naomi noticed details she'd missed from a distance. The carefully tended vegetable garden to one side, the stack of firewood under the porch overhang, the rocking chair positioned to catch the sunset. This hadn't just been a property to her father, it had been a home. Hayes helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Let me check inside first," he said. "Place has been empty since February." Naomi waited on the porch while Hayes entered the cabin. Through the open door, she could see bookshelves lining one wall, just as he'd described. Her father's presence seemed to linger in the air around her, making her chest ache with a grief she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "All clear," Hayes called. "No unwelcome visitors." Stepping inside, Naomi was struck by the cabin's unexpected coziness. Though small, the main room was well organized with the bookshelves, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a comfortable-looking armchair beside a standing lamp. 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "The left is the main bedroom," Hayes confirmed, following her gaze. "Right is smaller. Your father used it for storage mostly." Naomi moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines. Philosophy, astronomy, mythology, history, her father's eclectic interests reflected in his collection. "He really did love his books," she murmured. "Coffee?" Hayes asked, moving to the small kitchen area at the back of the room. "I brought fresh supplies." "That would be lovely, thank you." Naomi continued exploring while Hayes busied himself with the stove. A desk beneath the window held papers and a leather-bound journal. Curious, she opened it to find her father's familiar handwriting filling the pages. "Hayes," she called. "Did you know my father kept a journal?" He glanced over. "Can't say I did. Abe was entitled to his private thoughts." Naomi closed the journal, deciding to examine it later. "You said your property borders this one. You're my neighbor then." "That I am." Hayes poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "My place is just over that rise to the south. Not much grander than this, but it suits me and my horses." "You raise horses?" "Mustangs," he nodded. "Catch them wild, gentle them, train them for riding or work, sell some, keep others, make a decent living." Naomi accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you for bringing me here and for the coffee. Least I could do for Abe's daughter." Hayes leaned against the table. "What are your plans now, Naomi? Will you sell the place and head back east?" The question caught her off guard. In truth, she hadn't thought beyond claiming her inheritance. Her life in Boston as a schoolteacher had grown stale, the walls of her aunt's house increasingly confining after her aunt's passing last year. There was nothing pulling her back. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I need time to decide." Hayes nodded. "Fair enough, it's not a decision to rush." He finished his coffee. "I should unload those supplies and check on your father's horses. They'll need tending if you're staying." While Hayes worked outside, Naomi explored the bedroom. Like the main room, it was simple but comfortable, with a sturdy bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk. A daguerreotype on the wall caught her attention, a family portrait from years ago. She recognized herself as a child, standing beside her seated mother, with her father standing behind them, his hand resting on her mother's shoulder. They looked happy, the 3 of them, before grief and distance had pulled them apart. When Naomi returned to the main room, she found Hayes building a fire in the fireplace. "Nights get cold still, even in April," he explained. "This should keep you warm." "You speak as if I'm staying tonight," Naomi said. Hayes straightened, dusting his hands. "Aren't you? It's your place now." "I hadn't planned. I mean, I have a room at the inn." "True, but that'll cost you money each night. This place is yours free and clear." He gestured around. "It's clean, secure, and I've stocked the pantry. Those horses in the corral need daily care. No sense paying someone to ride out here when you could do it yourself." His logic was sound, yet Naomi hesitated. The thought of spending the night alone in this isolated cabin was daunting. Hayes seemed to read her thoughts. "I understand your concerns, being out here alone, but Promise Creek is peaceful country, and I'm just over that rise if you need anything." He paused. "That said, if you'd feel safer in town, I'd be happy to drive you back." Naomi looked around the cabin at the books her father had read, the chair where he'd sat, the home he'd built for himself. Something tugged at her, a desire to understand the man who had been her father, to connect with him in death in a way she never had in life. "I'll stay," she decided. "But perhaps you could show me how to care for the horses before you leave. I'm afraid my experience with livestock is limited." Hayes grinned. "I'd be happy to give you your first lesson in frontier living, Miss Winters." The afternoon passed quickly as Hayes taught Naomi the basics of horse care. The 3 animals, a gentle mare named Juniper, a more spirited gelding called Rocket, and an older plow horse named Duke, seemed to accept her readily enough. especially when Hayes showed her where the oats were kept. "Your father bred Juniper himself," Hayes explained as they brushed the mare's chestnut coat. "She's steady and sure-footed, good horse for a beginner." "Are you suggesting I learn to ride?" Naomi asked, somewhat alarmed. "Can't really live out here without riding," Hayes pointed out. "It's like expecting to live in Boston without knowing how to walk." "I suppose you're right," Naomi conceded. "Though I warn you, I may not be a natural horsewoman." "We'll find out soon enough," Hayes said with a smile. "I could come by tomorrow, give you your first lesson if you'd like." "I would appreciate that," Naomi said, surprised by how much she meant it. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Hayes prepared to leave. "You're sure you'll be all right here alone?" he asked, standing by his wagon. "I believe so," Naomi said with more confidence than she felt. "You've been most kind, Hayes." He hesitated, then reached into his wagon and pulled out a rifle. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Naomi shook her head. "It's loaded and ready, just in case." He demonstrated how to hold it and where the trigger was. "I doubt you'll need it, but better to have it and not need it." "Thank you," Naomi said, accepting the weapon gingerly. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," Hayes promised. "If you need anything before then, fire 3 shots in the air, I'll hear it." As Hayes's wagon disappeared over the rise, Naomi found herself truly alone for the first time since arriving in Wyoming territory. The silence was profound, not the absence of sound, but a different kind of soundscape than she was accustomed to. The rustle of wind through grass, the gentle gurgle of the creek, the occasional whinny from the corral. Inside the cabin, she lit the lamps as darkness fell, then prepared a simple supper from the supplies Hayes had brought. Afterward, drawn to her father's desk, she opened his journal again. The earliest entries dated back to 1862, shortly after he had arrived in Wyoming. "Found a piece of land today that speaks to me," he had written. "A creek runs through it, clear and sweet. Mountains to the west catch the last light of day like they're on fire. This could be home if a man were looking to put down roots. Maybe I am." Naomi read for hours, tracing her father's journey through his own words, his struggles with the harsh winters, his triumphs in building the cabin, his observations of the land and its wildlife. She found scattered mentions of Hayes Callahan, first as the young Union veteran who settled south of my claim, later as Callahan, or simply HC. The entries suggested a relationship of mutual respect and occasional assistance, though rarely anything more personal. What surprised her most were the passages about herself more frequent than she would have imagined. Her father had noted her birthdays, mentioned letters he had received about her progress in school, even expressed regret at their separation, though he maintained it had been for the best. N. "Graduates next month," read an entry from 1873. "The letter says she's to become a teacher. Elizabeth would have been proud. Perhaps I should have gone east for the ceremony, but what would I say to her after all these years? Better she remembers me as I was, not as I've become." Tears blurred Naomi's vision. All these years, she had believed her father had forgotten her, but his journal told a different story. He had been following her life from afar, caring in his own remote way. The last entry was dated just weeks before his death. "Winter's grip is tight this year. Feel it in my bones, should write to N. One last time, but what would I say? That I'm sorry, that I've always been proud, that this land might speak to her as it spoke to me. Words were never my gift. Maybe someday she'll find her way here and know without my telling." Naomi closed the journal, her heart full. Her father had known somehow that she would come. Had he left the property to her hoping she would stay? The thought both unsettled and intrigued her. As she prepared for bed in her father's room, Naomi realized that for the first time since receiving news of his death, she felt connected to him. This land, this cabin, these books, they were pieces of Abraham Winters that she could touch and see, more tangible than the distant figure she had carried in her memory. And then there was Hayes Callahan, the neighbor who had known her father, who had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer when she stood alone in the rain. There was something about him that drew her: his quiet strength, his straightforward manner, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. Lying in her father's bed, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the Wyoming wilderness, Naomi wondered what the coming days would bring. and whether, perhaps, her father had been right about this land speaking to her too. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the bedroom window and the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Naomi dressed quickly in her simplest skirt and blouse, grateful that she had packed clothing more suited to country living than Boston society. After a hasty breakfast of coffee and bread, she stepped onto the porch just as Hayes rode into view, leading a second horse behind him. "Good morning," he called, dismounting with easy grace. "Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," Naomi replied, descending the porch steps. "Though I spent much of the evening reading my father's journal." Hayes looked curious but didn't pry. "I brought Daisy for your riding lesson," he said, gesturing to the second horse, a dappled gray mare with gentle eyes. "She's mine, but she's patient with beginners." Naomi eyed the horse uncertainly. "I'm not sure if I should be grateful or terrified," Hayes laughed, the sound warming something inside her. "A healthy mix of both is probably wise." He tied both horses to the hitching post. "But first, have you checked on your father's horses this morning?" Naomi had to admit she hadn't, and Hayes led her through the morning routine of feeding and watering the animals. He was a patient teacher, explaining each step clearly without making her feel incompetent. By the time they finished, Naomi felt a small sense of accomplishment. "Now for your riding lesson," Hayes announced. "We'll start simple, just getting you comfortable in the saddle." The next hour passed in a blur of new experiences, learning to mount properly, finding her balance in the saddle, holding the reins correctly, and giving basic commands. Hayes led Daisy around the corral on a long rope, gradually giving Naomi more control. By the end of the lesson, she had managed to guide the horse in a complete circuit of the corral without assistance. "You're a natural," Hayes declared as he helped her dismount. "I think that's an exaggeration," Naomi said, laughing despite the ache in muscles she hadn't known existed. "But thank you for the encouragement." "Hungry?" Hayes asked. "I thought we might have a picnic by the creek, give you a chance to see more of your property." The suggestion surprised her, but pleasantly so. "That sounds lovely." Hayes produced a canvas bag from his saddlebags. "Mrs. Parsons packed this when I mentioned I'd be giving you riding lessons today. She seems to have taken a shine to you." They settled beneath a cottonwood tree near a bend in the creek, spreading a blanket on the new spring grass. The bag contained an impressive array of food: cold chicken, cornbread, pickles, apples, and even a jar of lemonade. "Mrs. Parsons is quite generous," Naomi observed as they ate. "She thinks every person in Promise Creek needs feeding up," Hayes said with a grin. "Especially newcomers." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the creek's gentle babble. Naomi found herself studying Hayes when he wasn't looking the way the breeze ruffled his dark hair, the strength in his hands as he broke apart the cornbread, the easy confidence in his posture. "Tell me about yourself, Hayes," she said finally. "How did a Union soldier from Missouri end up raising horses in Wyoming?" Hayes leaned back against the tree trunk. "Not much to tell. Joined up in '61, fought at Shiloh, Vicksburg, a handful of smaller engagements. Got wounded at Chattanooga, nothing serious, but enough to earn me an early discharge." He touched his left side briefly. "Came west afterward, like a lot of men who didn't want to go back to what they'd left behind." "What had you left behind?" Naomi asked gently. "A sweetheart who couldn't wait," he said without bitterness. "Family farm that got burned during the fighting. Figured I'd start fresh where the land was open and the past couldn't follow. And did it work, the fresh start?" Hayes looked around at the rolling landscape. "Most days, I'd say yes. Found something out here I didn't know I was looking for, a kind of peace." His eyes met hers. "What about you, Naomi? What are you looking for?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I came to claim my inheritance, but now that I'm here." "Now that you're here." He prompted when she trailed off. "I'm beginning to understand why my father chose this place," she said. "There's something about it that feels right somehow, even though it's so different from everything I've known." Hayes nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. "That's how it was for your father, and for me." He paused. "Speaking of your father, there's something you should know, something I've been putting off telling you." Naomi tensed. "What is it?" "Your father's land. This land is at the center of a dispute," Hayes said, his expression serious. "Has been for years." There's a cattle outfit north of here, the Double Bar, run by a man named Victor Russell. He's been trying to buy up all the small holdings along Bitter Creek to control the water rights. And my father refused to sell, Naomi guessed. Refused even to discuss it, Hayes confirmed. Russell didn't take kindly to that. Nothing violent, mind you, Russell's too smart for that, but there's been pressure, and with your father gone. He met her eyes directly. Russell will likely approach you with an offer, probably a generous one. Is that why you asked if I plan to sell? Naomi asked, understanding dawning. Hayes nodded. If Russell gets control of this stretch of Bitter Creek, he could dam it or divert it, leaving the downstream properties, including mine, high and dry. Your father understood that. It's why he held on so stubbornly. I see. Naomi considered this new information. Have you had trouble with this Mr. Russell? Not directly. Like I said, he's smart, works through lawyers and bank managers, makes everything seem above board. Hayes ran a hand through his hair. I'm not trying to influence your decision, Naomi. The land is yours to sell or keep as you see fit. I just wanted you to understand the situation. I appreciate your honesty, Naomi said, though I admit it complicates matters. They fell silent, the weight of unspoken implications hanging between them. If Naomi sold her father's land to Russell, it could threaten Hayes's livelihood. If she kept it, she might find herself embroiled in a conflict she hadn't sought. Enough serious talk, Hayes said finally, packing away the remains of their picnic. Let's get you back on that horse. By the end of the day, I want you trotting around that corral like you were born to it. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur of activity. Hayes proved to be as patient with Naomi's riding as he had been with everything else, never showing frustration when she made mistakes, always ready with encouragement when she succeeded. By late afternoon, she had indeed progressed to a trot, though her posture left much to be desired. I may never walk normally again, she groaned as she dismounted for the final time, her legs wobbling beneath her. Hayes laughed. You'll be sore tomorrow, that's for certain, but it gets easier with practice. Will you come tomorrow? The question slipped out before Naomi could consider it properly, revealing more eagerness than she had intended. Hayes smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. If you'd like me to. I would, she said simply. Then I'll be here, he promised, though I have some business in town first. Shall we say midday? After Hayes departed, Naomi tended to her father's horses as he had shown her, finding satisfaction in the simple tasks. As she worked, she pondered her situation. The revelation about Victor Russell and the water rights dispute added a layer of complexity to her decision about the property. She had come to Promise Creek expecting to settle her father's affairs quickly and return to Boston, but now she wasn't so sure. The land had begun to work its magic on her, just as it had on her father. And there was Hayes, whose company she found herself enjoying more than she had anticipated. He was unlike the men she had known in Boston, straightforward, where they were calculating, genuine where they were polished, strong in ways that had nothing to do with social standing or wealth. That evening, Naomi lit the lamps and returned to her father's journal, seeking insight. The entries about Victor Russell painted a picture of a determined adversary, not evil, perhaps, but single-minded in his pursuit of dominance over the region. Russell came by again today, read an entry from 1874. Offered twice what this land is worth on paper. Doesn't understand that some things can't be measured in dollars. This creek, these mountains, the silence at dawn, how does a man put a price on such things? Told him the land isn't for sale at any price. He didn't like that answer. Won't be the last I hear from him. Later entries mentioned increasing pressure. Russell's lawyer visited, then his banker. Now the county assessor has raised my property taxes. Coincidence? I think not. Callahan faces the same tactics. We stand together, though Russell tries to divide us. Water flows downhill and principles should stand just as firm. The final mention of Russell came just a month before her father's death. Russell sent word he's willing to triple his offer, says he's being generous given my situation. Vultures circle before the body's cold. Wrote to N. Today. If anything happens to me, she should know about her inheritance, about this land, about what it means. Naomi closed the journal, troubled. Had her father suspected foul play? The letter she had received had mentioned only that he had passed away after a brief illness, with no suggestion of anything untoward. Yet his words suggested a concern beyond normal caution. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with rushing water and shadowy figures. She woke before dawn, the cabin still dark around her. Rather than trying to return to sleep, she dressed and stepped onto the porch to watch the sun rise over the eastern plains. The transformation was magical, first a lightening of the black sky to deep blue, then a line of pink along the horizon that gradually spread upward, painting the underside of scattered clouds in brilliant orange and gold. As the sun itself appeared, the dewdrops on the grass caught fire, turning the meadow into a sea of diamonds. "So this is what you saw, Father," she whispered. "This is what you couldn't put a price on." In that moment, something shifted inside Naomi. The land was speaking to her, just as her father had hoped it would. She couldn't yet say whether she would stay permanently, but selling to Victor Russell no longer seemed like an option she could consider. After breakfast, Naomi decided to explore her property more thoroughly. Hayes had mentioned the land encompassed 50 acres, extending from the ridge to the north down to where Bitter Creek exited the property to the south, flowing toward Hayes's land beyond. She followed the creek, noting the richness of the soil along its banks, the variety of plants growing nearby, the birds and small animals that came to drink. Near the southern boundary, she discovered something unexpected: a small hot spring, its water bubbling up into a natural stone basin before overflowing into the creek. Steam rose from its surface despite the warm morning. Returning to the cabin, Naomi made a simple lunch, then changed into her riding skirt in anticipation of Hayes's arrival. When midday came and went with no sign of him, she told herself he was merely delayed in town. By mid-afternoon, however, she began to worry. Just as she was considering riding Juniper to Hayes's property, a journey she wasn't entirely confident in making alone, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by alarm as she stepped onto the porch and saw not Hayes but 3 riders approaching from the north. The man in the lead was older, perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black suit that, while not ostentatious, spoke of quality and wealth. The 2 men flanking him were clearly ranch hands, their weathered faces watchful beneath their hat brims. Naomi straightened her spine, determined not to show the unease that prickled along her skin. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she called as they reined to a stop before the cabin. "Miss Winters, I presume," the older man said, removing his hat. "Victor Russell, at your service. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but when I heard Abe's daughter had arrived to claim his property, I felt I should pay my respects." So this was Russell. Naomi studied him carefully, seeing nothing overtly threatening in his appearance or manner. Yet something in his eyes, a calculation, of assessment, made her wary. "Mr. Russell," she acknowledged, "I've heard your name mentioned." A smile touched his lips. "All good things, I hope, though I doubt it. Your father and I had our differences, so I understand." Naomi remained on the porch, deliberately not inviting them to dismount. "What can I do for you, Mr. Russell?" "Direct, like your father," Russell observed. "I appreciate that quality. I've come to discuss business, Miss Winters. I had an ongoing negotiation with Abraham regarding this property, and I'd like to continue that conversation with you." "I was under the impression that my father refused to negotiate," Naomi said coolly. Russell's smile tightened. "Perhaps negotiation is too formal a term. Let's say we had discussions about the future of this land." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "I'd like to make you an offer, Miss Winters, a generous one in recognition of your father's attachment to this place." "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Russell," Naomi said firmly. "You haven't heard my offer yet," Russell pointed out. $5,000. That's more than 10 times what this land is worth by any reasonable assessment. The sum was staggering enough to buy a fine house in Boston, to live comfortably for years without working. But Naomi thought of her father's words in his journal, of the sunrise she had witnessed that morning, of Hayes's concern about the water rights. "As I said, I'm not interested," she repeated. Russell studied her for a long moment. "You've been speaking with Callahan," he said, not a question but a statement. "Mr. Callahan has been kind enough to assist me since my arrival," Naomi acknowledged. "Has he mentioned that he stands to benefit if you refuse to sell?" Russell asked. "That his property depends on the water that flows through yours. He has been entirely forthcoming about the situation," Naomi said, her tone cooling further. "More so than you appear to be, Mr. Russell." A flash of anger crossed Russell's face before his expression smoothed. "I see. Well, perhaps you need time to consider your position more carefully. Frontier life can be challenging for a woman alone, Miss Winters. Dangerous, even." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Naomi's hand itched for the rifle Hayes had left, though it remained inside the cabin. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I've made my decision. The property is not for sale." Russell replaced his hat. "Decisions can be reconsidered, Miss Winters. I'll leave my offer with you." He tossed the envelope onto the porch steps. "When you've had more time to think about your situation, I'll be happy to discuss terms again." With a nod to his men, Russell turned his horse and rode away, leaving the envelope lying in the dust. Naomi remained on the porch until the riders disappeared over the northern ridge, only then allowing her shoulders to slump as tension drained from her body. She picked up the envelope, tempted to throw it into the fire without opening it. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket. Evidence, perhaps, though of what crime she wasn't certain. Where was Hayes? His absence now worried her more than before. Had Russell done something to delay him? The thought chilled her. As the afternoon waned, Naomi busied herself with caring for the horses and preparing a simple supper, all the while keeping an eye on the southern ridge, hoping to see Hayes appear. When darkness fell with no sign of him, she reluctantly locked the cabin door and placed the rifle within easy reach of her bed. Sleep came in fitful bursts, every sound jerking her awake. Near dawn, she dozed more deeply, only to be startled awake by a pounding on the cabin door. "Naomi. Are you all right?" Hayes's voice sent relief coursing through her. She rushed to the door, throwing it open to find him standing there, his face lined with worry, his clothes dusty from hard riding. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "I was so concerned when you didn't come yesterday." "Russell's men." Hayes's voice was tight with anger. "They sabotaged my wagon in town, made sure I couldn't get back here. By the time I realized what had happened and got Ranger saddled, it was too late to ride out." "Did Russell come here?" Naomi nodded. "Yesterday afternoon. He offered to buy the property." "And?" Hayes searched her face anxiously. "I refused," Naomi said simply. The tension in Hayes's shoulders eased slightly. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I should have warned you more clearly about what kind of man Russell is." "You told me enough," Naomi assured him. "Come inside. You look exhausted." Hayes followed her into the cabin, removing his hat. His hair was disheveled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "I rode out at first light," he explained. "Couldn't sleep for worrying about you alone out here." The concern in his voice warmed Naomi. "I'm perfectly fine," she said, moving to the stove. "Let me make you some coffee." As she prepared the pot, Hayes sank into a chair at the table. "What exactly did Russell say to you?" Naomi recounted the conversation, including Russell's veiled threat about the dangers of frontier life. "He left this," she added, retrieving the envelope from where she had placed it on the desk. "His offer, $5,000. Hayes let out a low whistle. "That's more than he offered your father." "It doesn't matter," Naomi said, placing a cup of coffee before him. "I won't sell to him, regardless of the amount." Hayes looked up at her, surprise and something like admiration in his eyes. "You're certain? That's a lot of money, Naomi." "Some things can't be measured in dollars," she said, echoing her father's words from his journal. "This land meant something to my father. I'm beginning to understand why." Hayes's gaze held hers for a long moment. "You're an unexpected woman, Naomi Winters." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said with a small smile. It was meant as one. Hayes sipped his coffee. "But Russell won't give up easily. He'll try again, maybe with more pressure." "Then I'll refuse again," Naomi said firmly. "I'm more stubborn than I look," Hayes chuckled. "That I believe," his expression sobered. "But I don't like you being out here alone with Russell making threats, however veiled. Would you consider staying in town for a while? at least until we can be sure Russell won't try anything foolish. This is my home now, Naomi said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I won't be driven away by threats. Then I'll stay, Hayes said decisively. I can bed down in the barn, just until we're sure Russell has gotten the message. Naomi's first instinct was to protest it wasn't proper, a single man staying on her property. But propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the very real threat Russell might pose, and there was something deeply reassuring about Hayes's presence. If you're certain it's necessary, she conceded. Though I'd offer the spare bedroom rather than the barn. Hayes shook his head. The barn is fine, better that way. He didn't elaborate, but Naomi understood if Russell or his men returned, Hayes would hear them approach. The next few days fell into a pattern. During daylight hours, Hayes continued Naomi's riding lessons, taught her to shoot the rifle, at which she proved surprisingly adept, and helped her learn the rhythms of caring for the property. They shared meals, talked for hours beside the fireplace in the evenings, and gradually, Naomi felt herself relaxing into this new life. Hayes, she discovered, was well-read despite his frontier lifestyle. He had books of his own poetry, history, novels, and they often discussed what they were reading. He told her stories of the early days in Promise Creek, of the characters who had come and gone, of the land's subtle changes through the seasons. In turn, she shared memories of Boston, of her teaching experiences, of the aunt who had raised her after her father sent her east. At night, Hayes retired to the barn and Naomi to her father's bedroom, but she found herself increasingly aware of the short distance between them and of the growing feelings that made that distance seem both too great and not great enough. A week after Russell's visit, Hayes announced he needed to return to his own property for the day. My foreman's been handling things, but there's business I should attend to, he explained over breakfast. Will you be all right here alone? Perfectly fine, Naomi assured him. I have the rifle and I've proven I can hit what I aim at, Hayes smiled. That you have. Still, stay close to the cabin and if you hear riders coming, I'll be careful, she promised. Stop worrying, Hayes. After he rode out, Naomi found herself at loose ends. The cabin seemed quieter without his presence, the day stretching longer before her. To occupy herself, she decided to clean out the spare bedroom, which was still filled with her father's stored possessions. Among the crates and trunks, she discovered a wooden box containing letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon. To her surprise, they were addressed to her father from her mother, dating back to before their marriage. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Naomi opened the first letter with trembling hands. My dearest Abraham, her mother had written in a flowing script. Your latest letter filled my heart with joy. How strange that words on paper can bridge the miles between us, can make me feel your presence as if you were beside me. Mother continues to disapprove of our correspondence, but I find I care less each day for her opinion. Your description of the Western Territories sounds like something from a novel, wild and free and full of possibility. Perhaps someday I will see these places with you. Tears filled Naomi's eyes as she read letter after letter, witnessing the love story between her parents unfold, her mother's initial hesitation about leaving Boston, her father's patient wooing, their eventual marriage and early happiness. The letters continued after Naomi's birth, though less frequently, and she found references to herself as a baby, as a toddler, as a young child. The final letter was dated just weeks before her mother's death from influenza. I fear this winter's chill has settled deep in my chest, her mother had written. Dr. Bennett says it is nothing to worry over, but I find myself thinking of our Naomi, of what would become of her if anything should happen to me. Promise me, my love, that you will keep her safe, that you will ensure she has all the advantages we discussed. She is so like you, bright and curious and strong-willed. She deserves every opportunity. Naomi set the letter down, understanding dawning. Her father hadn't sent her away out of indifference or lack of love, but because of a promise to her dying mother, a promise to give their daughter the education and opportunities that the frontier couldn't provide in those early years. The realization brought both pain and healing. Her father had kept his promise, at great personal cost. He had remained alone in Wyoming while sending his only child back east, financing her education and upbringing from afar. The distance between them had been physical, not emotional, at least not from his side. Caught up in these revelations, Naomi didn't immediately register the sound of approaching riders. By the time she recognized the danger, hoofbeats were already in the yard. She rushed to the window, her heart sinking as she saw Victor Russell dismounting, accompanied by 3 men, this time ranch hands with hard faces and guns at their hips. Naomi grabbed the rifle from beside the door, checking that it was loaded as Hayes had taught her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She would not show fear. "Miss Winters," Russell called from the yard, "I'd like a word with you." Naomi stepped onto the porch, the rifle held not quite pointed at the men, but ready. "Mr. Russell, I believe I made my position clear during your last visit." Russell's eyes narrowed at the sight of the weapon. "I see Callahan has been teaching you more than just riding." He removed his hat, affecting a casual demeanor despite the tension vibrating in the air. "I've come with a revised offer. $7,000. You won't get a better price, not in this territory, not anywhere." "The property is not for sale," Naomi said firmly. "Not at any price." Russell's facade of politeness slipped. "Don't be a fool, Miss Winters. You're not cut out for life out here. Take the money and go back east where you belong." "This is where I belong now," Naomi said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "This was my father's land and now it's mine. I won't sell it to you or anyone else." Russell's expression hardened. "Your father was a stubborn man too. Look where it got him." A chill ran down Naomi's spine. "What do you mean by that?" "Just that stubbornness can be unhealthy," Russell said, his tone suddenly silky. "Especially out here where accidents happen so easily." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Russell?" Naomi's grip tightened on the rifle. "Not at all, just stating facts." Russell gestured to his men. "Jake here was telling me just yesterday about a cabin that burned down over in Johnson County. Terrible tragedy. Family never woke up." Naomi raised the rifle, pointing it directly at Russell now. "I think you should leave, Mr. Russell." The men tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but Russell raised a hand, stopping them. "No need for unpleasantness. We're just having a conversation." He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Think about my offer, Miss Winters. $7,000. Cash. I'll give you 3 days to reconsider after that." He shrugged. "Well, my patience has limits." With that, he replaced his hat and mounted his horse, his men following suit. Naomi kept the rifle raised until they disappeared over the ridge, then sagged against the doorframe, her heart pounding. The threat had been clear this time: sell or face the consequences. She remained on the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon nervously until, near sunset, she spotted a rider approaching from the south. The relief that flooded through her at the sight of Hayes's familiar silhouette was overwhelming. "Naomi." He called as he galloped into the yard, clearly alarmed by the sight of her with the rifle. "What happened?" She told him about Russell's visit, his increased offer, and his thinly veiled threat about the cabin fire. Hayes's expression darkened with each word. "This has gone far enough," he said, pacing the cabin floor after they went inside. "Russell's always played rough, but threatening a woman, threatening to burn you out, that crosses a line." "What can we do?" Naomi asked. "Should we go to the sheriff?" Hayes ran a hand through his hair. "Sheriff Brody's a good man, but it would be your word against Russell's, and Russell has influence in the county." He stopped pacing, facing her directly. "There might be another way, though, a way to stop Russell for good." "How?" Naomi asked, hopeful. "Your father found something on this property," Hayes said. "Something he never reported officially. He told me about it just before he died, made me promise to tell you if you ever came to claim the land." "What are you talking about?" Naomi's brow furrowed in confusion. "Gold," Hayes said simply. "Not a major strike, but a decent vein in the hillside north of the creek. Enough that if it were registered with the Territorial Mining Office, this land would be protected under federal mining law." "Russell couldn't touch it then, not without taking on the federal government." Naomi stared at him. "My father found gold. Why didn't he report it himself?" "He didn't want the attention," Hayes explained. didn't want a rush of prospectors and claim jumpers descending on Promise Creek. He was content to work it quietly, take just what he needed, but he knew someday it might be necessary to make it official to protect the land. "And you think that time is now?" Naomi said slowly. Hayes nodded. "If we register the claim, Russell will have no choice but to back off. Mining rights supersede water rights in the territory. He knows that." "Show me," Naomi said decisively. By lantern light, Hayes led her to a spot on the northern slope where a narrow opening had been cut into the hillside, concealed by brush and fallen logs. Inside, a crude tunnel extended about 20 feet before opening into a small chamber. Hayes held the lantern high, illuminating a quartz vein running through the rock wall, flecked with the unmistakable yellow gleam of gold. "It's not a motherlode," Hayes cautioned. "But it's genuine, and there's enough here to qualify as a valid claim." Back at the cabin, they formulated a plan. Hayes would ride to the county seat the next day to file the mining claim in Naomi's name. Once registered, the claim would effectively end Russell's ability to pressure her to sell. "What if Russell's men try to stop you?" Naomi worried. "I'll be careful," Hayes promised. "Take the back trails, avoid the main road." "And what about tonight? What if they come back?" Hayes's expression was grim. "I'll sleep in the cabin tonight, on the floor in the main room. If anyone comes, I'll hear them." The arrangement should have scandalized Naomi, but fear overrode convention. She nodded her agreement, then set about preparing a simple supper while Hayes checked the property's perimeter and secured the barn. That night, after Naomi had retired to her bedroom, she lay awake, listening to Hayes moving quietly in the main room, the reassuring sounds of his presence keeping her fears at bay. Despite the danger hanging over them, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if all the twists and turns of her life had been leading her here, to this land, to this moment, and to Hayes. The realization settled over her with the weight of truth. In just a few short weeks, he had become essential to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. His steady presence, his quiet strength, his unwavering support, these had become as necessary to her as the air she breathed. Morning arrived with no disturbances. Hayes prepared to leave for the county seat, strapping on a gun belt Naomi hadn't seen him wear before. "I should be back by nightfall," he told her, checking his saddle cinch. "Keep the rifle handy and stay inside as much as possible." "Be careful," Naomi said, anxiety tightening her chest. Hayes paused, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "I will." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly. "Naomi, when this is over." "Yes," she prompted. When he fell silent, he shook his head. "We'll talk when I get back." With that, he mounted and rode away, leaving Naomi standing in the yard, his unfinished sentence hanging in the air between them. The day stretched endlessly before her. Naomi busied herself with chores, keeping the rifle within reach at all times. She read more of her mother's letters, finding comfort in the connection to her parents' past. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising another spring storm. As dusk approached, with no sign of haze and rain beginning to fall, Naomi's worry intensified. Had Russell's men intercepted him? Had there been trouble at the mining office? Or was it simply the weather delaying his return? The storm grew stronger, rain lashing against the cabin windows, wind howling around the eaves. Naomi lit the lamps and built up the fire, trying to focus on practical matters rather than her mounting fears. She prepared a stew, hoping Hayes would arrive hungry and cold but safe. When a pounding came at the door, relief surged through her until she realized the sound was too heavy, too aggressive to be Hayes. Grabbing the rifle, she approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called. "Open up, Miss Winters." Victor Russell's voice carried even over the storm. "We need to talk." Naomi's heart hammered in her chest. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Russell." "I think you do," Russell replied. "Especially when I tell you that your friend Callahan ran into some trouble on his way back from the county seat." Fear clutched at Naomi's throat. "What have you done to him?" "Nothing permanent." "Yet," Russell's voice hardened. "Open the door, Miss Winters. Now." Naomi weighed her options. She could refuse, but if Russell truly had Hayes, with trembling fingers she unbolted the door, holding the rifle ready as she pulled it open. Russell stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. Behind him in the yard, two of his men held a third figure between them, Hayes, his head slumped forward, blood mixing with rainwater on his face. "Hayes," Naomi gasped. Russell stepped forward, forcing Naomi back into the cabin. His men followed, dragging Hayes with them. They dropped him onto the floor where he groaned but didn't fully regain consciousness. "What have you done to him?" Naomi demanded, the rifle still clutched in her hands though she knew she was outnumbered. "Just persuaded him to hand over certain papers," Russell said, producing a folded document from inside his coat. "Your mining claim. Quite clever, really. Would have worked too if my men hadn't spotted him leaving the mining office." Naomi's hope plummeted. Without the registered claim, they had no protection against Russell's pressure tactics. "Now," Russell continued, "we're going to have a civilized discussion about the future of this property." He gestured to one of his men, who moved to stand behind Naomi, his presence menacing. "Put down the rifle, Miss Winters. It won't help you now." Naomi glanced at Hayes, who was beginning to stir on the floor, then at the armed men surrounding her. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. "That's better," Russell said. "Now I'm going to make you one final offer, $10,000. That's my absolute limit and far more than this property is worth, even with the gold. You'll sign the deed tonight, take the money, and leave Promise Creek by morning. In return, Callahan here lives." The threat hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Naomi looked at Hayes, who had raised his head and was watching her through pain-glazed eyes. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't," he managed to say, his voice rough. "Naomi, don't." One of Russell's men kicked him, silencing him. "Stop," Naomi cried. "Don't hurt him further." "Then make the sensible choice," Russell said. "Take the money, save your friend, go back to civilization where you belong." For a moment, Naomi wavered. $10,000 was a fortune, enough to secure her future anywhere she chose to go. And Hayes's life was worth more than any property, any principle. But then she thought of her father, of the love he had borne for this land, of the sacrifices he had made to keep it safe. She thought of the promise she had felt standing on the porch at dawn, watching the sun rise over her inheritance. And she thought of Hayes, of the future they might build together if only they survived this night. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I won't sell, not to you." "Not ever." Russell's face darkened with anger. "You're making a mistake, Miss Winters, a potentially fatal one." "The only mistake," came a new voice from the doorway, "is thinking you could get away with this, Russell." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Brody standing in the open doorway, rain dripping from his slicker, a shotgun leveled at Russell's men. Behind him stood several deputies, similarly armed. "Sheriff," Russell said, quickly composing his features, "this is a private business negotiation." "Funny kind of negotiation that involves beating a man half to death," Brody observed dryly. "Step away from Miss Winters and Callahan. Now." Russell's men looked to their boss for direction. For a tense moment, Naomi feared they would resist, turning the cabin into a battlefield. Then Russell raised his hands slowly. "This is a misunderstanding, Sheriff," he said smoothly. "We were just talking." "Save it for the judge," Brody replied. "We've got witnesses who saw your men ambush Callahan on the road. And I expect Miss Winters will have plenty to say about your business negotiation here tonight." As the deputies disarmed and secured Russell and his men, Naomi rushed to Hayes's side, cradling his head gently. "Hayes, can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open, focusing on her face. "Naomi," he murmured. "You're all right. I'm fine," she assured him, tears threatening. "It's you I'm worried about." "Just a headache," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a wince. "Did you get the claim registered?" Sheriff Brody approached, having overheard the question. "We found the papers on Russell," he said, handing the folded document to Naomi. "I'll make sure they're filed properly first thing tomorrow." "Thank you, Sheriff," Naomi said fervently. "But how did you know to come here tonight?" "Hayes stopped by my office before heading to the mining office," Brody explained. "Told me about Russell's threats, asked me to keep an eye on the situation. When he didn't return to town as expected, I gathered some deputies and rode out." He looked down at Hayes with concern. "Let's get him cleaned up. Doc Thompson is in town if he needs stitching." With the sheriff's help, Naomi got Hayes into a chair by the fire. His injuries, while painful, proved less severe than they had initially appeared. A cut above his eye that had bled profusely, bruises on his face and ribs, but nothing broken. As the deputies led Russell and his men away, Sheriff Brody promised to return the next day to take formal statements. "Russell won't trouble you again," he assured Naomi. "Assault, kidnapping, attempted coercion, he'll be facing serious charges. His days of bullying smaller landowners are over." After the sheriff departed, Naomi tended to Hayes's wounds, gently cleaning the cut on his forehead and applying a cold compress to the bruising. Rain continued to drum on the roof, but inside the cabin, a peaceful quiet had descended. "You should have taken the money," Hayes said softly as she worked. $10,000 is a lot to turn down." Naomi shook her head. "It wasn't about the money, it never was." "What was it about then?" Hayes asked, his eyes never leaving her face. "This land," she said simply. "What it meant to my father, what it's come to mean to me." She hesitated. "And you?" Hayes caught her hand, stilling her movements. "Me, yes." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I couldn't sell knowing it would hurt you, knowing it would end any chance of a future here together." Hayes's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. "Before Russell's men jumped me, I registered the claim," he said, "but I also filed another document, a marriage license application. I was going to ask you tonight when I returned." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know it's soon." "Too soon, probably, but these past weeks with you, Naomi, I've never felt this way about anyone." Naomi's heart seemed to expand in her chest. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not when it feels this right." Hayes pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I love you, Naomi Winters. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing in that rain, looking like a lost angel who'd somehow wandered into Wyoming territory." "I love you too," Naomi said, the words feeling natural, inevitable. "I think I was meant to come here, meant to find you." When Hayes kissed her, it was gentle, mindful of his injuries, but filled with promise. Outside, the storm began to ease, the drumming of rain softening to a gentle patter. Inside, Naomi felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had ever known. "Let me be the shelter you've needed," Hayes had said that first day, offering his hand in the downpour. He couldn't have known then how true those words would become, how completely they would define the love growing between them. 5 years later, Naomi sat on the porch of the expanded cabin, watching Hayes teach their 3-year-old son Abraham to ride his first pony in the corral. Beside her, their infant daughter Elizabeth slept peacefully in her cradle, undisturbed by her brother's excited shouts or her father's encouraging calls. The property had flourished under their care. Hayes had moved his horse operation to the combined land, breeding and training some of the finest horses in the territory. Naomi had established a small school that served the children of nearby homesteads, fulfilling her calling as a teacher while remaining rooted to the land she had come to love. The gold mine, modest though it was, provided enough additional income to ensure their comfort and their children's future. More importantly, it had secured their legal right to the property, protecting them from any future threats to their water or land rights. Victor Russell had been convicted and served 2 years in the territorial prison before selling his holdings and leaving Wyoming. The double bar had been divided and sold to smaller ranchers, creating a more balanced distribution of water rights throughout the region. As Naomi watched her family, contentment filled her heart. Her father's journal sat on her lap, open to one of his final entries. "A man's true legacy isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in the love he leaves behind. I hope someday Naomi will understand that. I hope someday she'll find here what I found, not just land, but a home." He had been right. She had found a home here, not just in the cabin or on the land, but in Hayes's arms, in the family they had created together, in the community they had helped to build. All because of a rainstorm, a chance meeting, and a cowboy who had offered to be her shelter when she needed it most. As if sensing her thoughts, Hayes looked up from the corral, his smile as warm and steady as it had been that first day. Naomi smiled back, lifting her hand in a wave that encompassed everything: their land, their children, their life together. The shelter they had built was strong enough to weather any storm, and the love they had found was as endless as the Wyoming sky stretching blue and boundless above them.